Yeah, but that we won't have a regular daf Tisha B'Av. Okay, I'm going to start us with the sponsors, and then we'll get into the today's Gemara. Okay. Year of learning Sue and Arnie Garelick in memory of Malka Pro Man and Philip Man, and Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Henya Rivka Pro Rosner Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell, and Irving and Pro Kaplan, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, China Bas Yeshaya, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova Bad Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levy, Malka Bad Yosef, friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim, Charlie Gelfenstein and Sam Levine, in memory of Ramona Levine, Rachumata Bad Asher. We have a month of learning by Dov Bloodlander in memory of his wife, Little Bas Yehuda Tzvi, by Mordechai and Miriam Burr, in memory of his father, Yaakov ben Mordechai, and by friends from Yarmouth E, in commemoration of the Shloshim from Miriam and Michael Schiffer's son, Zev David ben Shimon Halevi. We also have today being the 14th, right? We have a day of learning by Natalie Goldstein in memory of her husband, Kalman ben Eliyahu Hersh Halevi. And Shemas Heaven Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shema Tzliah, and the Chol B'nai Israel, a good Kaben Shtiyah. So look at the Gemara in a moment, but I first want to point out, remember, we're now dealing with the question of how many and how to set up the walls. I guess a few people aren't here today. Of the walls of the sukkah. Okay, we had a discussion. What about, we had basically considered 3 walls. Then we went to 2 walls plus a tefach, right? And we had the discussion of where was that final tefach angled, whether it was parallel, okay, or whether it was diagonal, okay, toward the opposite wall. We then saw an example, another case, where we just had 2 walls, and one of the rabbis suggested, well, you could take a board that was 4 tfachim width, okay, and therefore put it on either of the open, I'll call it, sides, all right, and therefore using levud, that would give us a 3rd wall. That was another suggestion, right? So we've seen a number of examples, and then the Gemara came back and say, wait a minute, we saw one rabbi, Rabbi Simon, that Rabbi Simon gave 2 different possible scenarios. One of them was to say, let's get what he called an extended tefach, right? That was one example. The other, where he came up with another example, right? So we're on Zion Amud Aleph. Okay, we're about halfway down the page, right? That's what I'm looking where we should pick up exactly. Okay. That's where we'll begin, but I want to go back just a little bit before that. Okay. Right. So, right. So let's just go back a couple of lines. Right. I'm going to go back. Ve'itema Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Amar Oseh Pas Arba Mashu Umamado B'Pachot Mishlosha Samuch L'Dofen V'Chol Pachot Mishlosha Samuch L'Dofen Kilavud Dami. Okay. All right. So I'm going about 2 or 3 lines up. I'm starting where it says Umayishna. Okay. So that is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's say 13 lines from the top of the Amud. Okay. It's okay, Umayishna. So the Gemara is starting with this. So just reviewing real quick, and then we pick up. Umayishna. So what's the difference, Hatam, there in that earlier example? Okay, that he said, the Kamar Sagya Tefach Sochek, that he said it was sufficient, it was appropriate, and one could use what we said was an extended Tefach. Right, we called it basic soche, smiling because the face is extended when one smiles. Okay, right? Umaish nahacha the kaamat by pas arba'a. Okay, and what is about the fact that it said here one could take a board that was 4 tfachim, okay, wide, and put that there in that empty space and use lavud then on either side of that board, okay, as a means of getting the third wall. Right? So the Gemara now responds, Hatam deika shtei dafnot kehilchatan, sagi le b'tefach sochek. There where we have 2 walls that according to the appropriate standard, right, we said that was generally considered 7 tfachim, right? What happens? So it would be sufficient, right, to have that board, right, of 4 tfachim wide. That would suffice, right? Okay. However, he says, right, a tefach sochek, right? That was the point. Hacha, but here in this case, he says deleka shtei defanot, where we don't have 2 walls, Ika pas arba'a, if then we add, right, that board of 4 width of 4 tfachim, and yes, that's fine. Okay, plus plus we said using lavud on either side. Elo, no, then not none. Okay, so that's where we left off yesterday. Okay, all right, so picking up then, Amar Rava. Okay, so Rava says as follows, Ve'inani teret ela b'tzurat hapetach. Okay, but Rava's statement, some want to explain it as a challenge, others want to explain it as a not a challenge, but a definition, a clarification. Okay, namely that if you're using that example of a board, you don't stick that board, okay, in the middle of the empty space, but you attach it to the end of one of the existing standard walls, and then you put a beam across the top from that piece of extension, and therefore you form what's called a doorway, a tzurat hapetach. And that is what's going to give that third wall, okay? And that's the example that the Gemara is showing in Rashi in that 4th, so to speak, drawing that we see there in the Rashi commentary. Okay, that's what that's supposed to give us a sense of, right? So how it depends on how we see that. Now, Ikeda Amre, there are those who say Amar Rabba, that this is what Rabba was saying. Okay? In other words, how do we understand Rabba's statement? Was it really a challenge? Was it really a clarification? So there are those who say that Rabba's statement is as follows. V'niteret nami b'tzurat hapeta. Okay? That in that particular case, all right, we could say it's permitted also with a doorway style. So that would seem to be simply more of in other words, not that you need both the small piece and the doorway, but it's sufficient with one or the other.
Two lefties in a car.
Okay, well, all right. Ika da Amre, and there are those who say Amar Rabba, Utsrichanami Tzurat Hapeta. And there are others who say no, the Rabba's language was that it's required to have, okay, the lechi, all right, and the korah. In other words, that's a requirement. Yes, you need both. So that's why some might say that Rabba's statement is more of a challenge than a clarification. Okay.
What is the distance that we're talking about?
Okay, the distance, we're saying that this piece of board that's added on could be, what would we say, 3 tfachim? Okay, 4 tfachim. So let's say it's a little bit. It could be 1 tefach.
No, I meant the distance. You have a tefach here, and you have a wall here, and you have the.
Oh, and you have the board.
What is
You
the
want to
distance?
get so that it suffices 7. That's 7 tfachim. Okay, because that was what we said was the standard wall.
Right.
What's it, how much is the depth?
Tefach is a handbreadth.
3 inches, 3
Oh,
inches.
3 to 4 inches.
Right.
If you look at Mel's fist compared to somebody else, it's
Yeah, but you don't do that. I mean,
I
there's
know.
different rabbinic.
Sam,
right.
Sam, 3 inches is a tefach.
Okay, so that's the
That you will
point.
understand.
All right.
No, not very-
Okay. Now, Rav Ashi Ashkechela Rav Kahana. So a story to try to clarify, I'm suggesting, what Rabba's statement was. Rav Ashi happened to find Rav Kahana, the Ka'avid Tefach Sochek, that he was making his sukkah using this extended tefach, okay? So it's more than just a single one. Maybe it's 2, but it's not necessarily 4.
Not like.
Well, we could put it in different ways. Koren has a picture of the difference between the two of them, whether the fingers are tight, whether the fingers are apart, okay? In other words, if you think about, one could argue there's certainly a difference, let's say, between a fist closed versus the extension between thumb and pinky, all right? So in any case, but our story is that Rav Kahana was using both techniques. He was using this extended tefach, v'ka'avid surat hapetach, and he was also using the example of the doorway. So he was taking the last statement, the last ibayelo of Rabbah, that you needed both. Okay? Amarle. So what happens? Okay, Rav Ashi asks him the following: Lo savar mar lahad de Rabbah. Doesn't the master hold according to the statement of Rabbah? The Amar Rabbah, where Rabbah says, "V'niteret nami b'tzurat hapeta," that it's permitted also using the doorway. In other words, it's an option. You could use either one. Okay? Amarle, Rav Kahana's response, Ana Ke'idach lishna de Rava severely. Okay, I, however, he says, hold by the other language. Okay, the other statement of Rabbah implying the statement where it requires both. Okay, the Amar Rabbah utsricha nami tzurat hapetach. And namely, the Gemara cites, he cites it again, where Rabbah says that we do need the tzurat hapetach in addition to the tefach soche, the extended tefach. Okay. Now that finishes that discussion. We go on to a new piece from the Mishnah, Shtayim Kihilchatan Kule. Okay, two of the walls have to be the standard measure. Okay, Amar Rava, says Rava, V'chein l'Shabbat, and likewise for Shabbat. What does that mean? Right? What are we talking about? Are we talking about a Eruv? Is that what it's suggesting? Are we talking about the Shabbat that's included in Sukkot?
First, we're talking about any Shabbat.
Okay, it would appear that what we're going to see is initially, if he says likewise for Shabbat, okay, when we talk about a Eruv, are we talking about these kinds of things? So let's see. Migo dahave dofen le'inyan sukkah. He says, since we see that that's the measurement for the sukkah, right? That that's a standard measurement for the wall of the sukkah. What happens? Okay, havya dofen le'inyan Shabbat. So that also is going to be the measure for the wall for Shabbos, right? So that would be the case.
So therefore, that sukkah that you have, even if it's just a rabbit, you can carry in the sukkah on Shabbos.
So
That's what
it
he's
means
saying.
exactly that if I have my house, the question is, if I have my house and I build my sukkah next door, right? Can I carry outside my house into the sukkah? The implication would be yes. Okay, that's the point. Okay. On that Shabbat. Now, is that that's what I say, is it only the Shabbat that it applies during the holiday of Sukkot? Or are we talking about in general? Right. So the Gemara then tells us, goes on and says, what?
Doesn't it depend how
We're
close?
talking adjacent.
Okay, it's right next door.
Okay, it's not attached, it's adjacent.
It's right. It's not attached to the house. It's next door.
It's next.
Okay, so what happens?
There's no problem.
Okay, so v'chein l'Shabbat. So he says, "Migo dahavya dofen linyan sukkah, havya dofen linyan Shabbat." Ative. But I'll challenge that, says the Gemara, with the following brayta. Ative abai. Umi amrina and migo. And do we really say since in that occasion? And can we really make that comparison, that derivative? Vahatanya, and we taught elsewhere in a brayta. Dofen sukkah, kedofen Shabbat. That the wall for sukkah is like the wall for Shabbos. Ubilvad shelo yehe bein kaneh lechavero shloshat tfachim. And that's so long as the fact that when we make the Eruv, okay, we do not make it, okay, from one, let's say, pole or one reed, okay,
Doing that picket fence.
okay, we're talking building this fence, okay, and the space is between each pole or each picket or each reed, okay, is no more, it can't be three or more.
There is no horizontal. there's
Okay,
just
it's,
vertical
hold on,
pickets.
okay? All right, so what happens? So it can't be, all right, so that's what he's saying. V'yetera Shabbat al Sukkah, and that would make Shabbat more stringent in a sense than Sukkah. Shehashabbat einani teret ela ba'omed merubeh al haparutz, because on Shabbat we say that it's not permitted to have this vertical kind of fence structured in a manner unless we can say that the standing pieces are more, right, than the open areas. Okay. Umasha ein kain b'sukkah, whereas that's not the case regarding the sukkah. Okay, my love. Okay, what is it not then? So here we have a situation, Yetera Shabbat the Sukkah, Asukah, that this seems to be that it's more stringent regarding Shabbat of the holiday of Sukkot than normally in regarding a situation of a normal Sukkah. Okay,
The rest of the day.
right? Velo Amrin and Migo. And therefore, we're not permitted to say this idea of since carrying over as we tried before. Lo, says the Gemara. Yetera, okay, the stringency Shabbat, the Alma al Shabbat the Sukkah. No, we have a stringency of the regular Shabbat more than a Shabbat that's part of Sukkot. Ihachi, if that's the case, says the Gemara, Litnei Nami, we should also teach it this way, or perhaps we should teach it instead this way. Yetera Sukkah da Alma Asukah de Shabbat, that there's a greater stringency of a sukkah in general than in regards to the sukkah than regards to the Shabbos that's part of the sukkah holiday. Okay, the ilu sukkah da alma, because in regards to the sukkah in general, by tefach soche, that there we need to put up that additional wall, and it must measure an extended tefach. Ve'ilu sukkah de Shabbat, but whereas if we're talking about the sukkah of Shabbat, lo bai tefach soche, we don't necessarily need then this extended, excuse me, tefach, v'sagi belechi, and it's sufficient enough with simply a lechi, a small little piece that could be just a tefach itself,
Be small.
okay? It could be even smaller, but I'm just using that as an example, okay? Daha, that in that case, atu da'amat sichech al gabe mabui sheyesh lo lechi kasher. Okay, because there we say that in order to make the sign that about Shabbat, okay, that about carrying, all we need to do is add a little piece, okay, to the wall, and that will make a symbolic, so to speak, wall there to recognize the change of domains. That's the point he's saying. Sheyesh lo lechi kasher. Hahu lo itztaricha. There we don't need it. Hashta mikilta lechamirta. And therefore we're going from the more lenient to the more strict. Amrinan michamirta lekilta lo kol shekain. Okay, so in that case, when we go from the strict to the more lenient, isn't that more so applicable? Okay, so the point of the Gemara at this juncture is to tell us, therefore, that we don't go from the lenient to the more stringent, but we can certainly go from the more stringent case to the more lenient case. Okay, so the more stringent case, okay, is the example of a general Shabbos. The more lenient case is now the point of the Shabbos, so connected with the holiday.
The other way. For a sukkah, you need to have more than just a little thing, but for a mavoi, a little thing is enough.
For sufficient, right? So the point being, though, that you're still going from the more stringent to the, okay, no, you're still going from the stringent to the more lenient, okay? Right, now, Gufa, let's go back. Says the Gemara, Amar Rava. Rava says elsewhere, okay, as we go and continue now. Sichach al gabe mabui, sheyesh lo lechi kshera. Okay, if we take schach and put it on on this alleyway that has this small extended piece, is that going to be a valid sukkah? The answer he's saying is yes. Okay. So what happens? Okay, va'amar Rava, and Rava says sichach al gabe pasei biraot kshera. So now let's take another example by Rava. If I have a well, and surrounding this well are boards that we called before double posts. Okay, so we have a picture again in the Rashi, okay, of Rashi's commentary, okay, of the double posts. Okay, all right, and there's the well. And if I put schach on top of that, okay, Rav is saying that that's going to make a valid sukkah. All right. Now, what's the problem with that? One of the problems is that there was only certain times of the year, okay, that the rabbis permitted and said that that area inside those double posts was acceptable. Okay, it was only during the time of pilgrimage.
And only in Israel.
Okay, and of course, only in Eretz Yisrael when people were coming from Chutz La'aretz to come there. Okay, so that's what those biraot are. Those double post boards. Okay, now what happens? Utsricha, and this was needed to be said. Why did Rava need to say these? The Iyashmein and Mabui. Because if he had simply said the statement regarding the alleyway, Mishum de'ika shtei dafnot ma'aliyata, because there with an alleyway, we know there are clearly two valid walls, right? That's what makes an alley, right? All we would simply need to add, we said is the koreh or the lechi, all right, to make it valid, to show the transition from one domain to another on Shabbat. Aval gabe pase biriot, but in regarding these double posts, the lekashte dafnot ma'aliyatan, where we don't have two significant or valid walls, aim alone. I might say no. V'iyashma'in and pase biriot. Sorry, and if Rabbah had only given us the example of the situation of the double post around the well, okay, for a sukkah, what about that? Mishum de'ika sham arba'a dafnot. I might have thought that was acceptable to Rabbah because at least in theory you have four walls. Aval sichech al gabe mabui, but to cover over and screen over the top of the alleyway, deleka sham arba dafnot, where there are not four walls there, amalo, I might say no. Furthermore, says the Gemara, ve'iyash me'inen hani tarte, and if I had said these two, michamirta lekilta, then I would be simply going from the stringent to the more lenient. Aval mikilta lechamirta, but to go from the more lenient to the more stringent, amalo, I would say no, sricha. Therefore, I needed to say all these examples. Okay. Having said that, we've now finished that discussion, and we go to a new topic. Remember, our Mishnah, going back, said that there were three criteria. The first one was shade, right? Second, that was the third. The first was height. Second one was walls, third one was shade. Now we're gonna get, sorry, to the shade. Okay. Right, so what happens? The Gemara says, "V'shechamata meruba mitzelta tsula." But if the amount of sun was greater than the amount of shade, it is an invalid sukkah. Tanu Rabbanan, a new brighter. Chamata mechamat sichuch. We're talking about shade. I'm going to say that's produced as a result of the ceiling covering. Velo mechamat dafnot, and not shade that's as a result of the walls. Rabbi Yoshia Omer, says Rabbi Yoshia, af mechamat dafnot, even shade produced from the walls. All right? Now, we don't hold by him, but in any case, that was his view. Amar Rav Yimar ba Shomaya, Mishmei da Abaye, somebody else now. My Tama de Rabbi Yoshia. What's Rabbi Yoshia's view? What does he base it on that he says that you can use and include the shade from the walls? Right? My Tama de Rabbi Yoshia dechtiv, because it's written in a pasuk, V'sukot al Aron, all right, et haparoch, right? Saying that this verse, okay, tells us what? Right, basically citing the pasuk, right? V'sakota al Aron et haparochet, and the screen, the ark with the parochos. Okay, parochet mechitza. The parochet is a kind of partition, a curtain. All right, right. So that's what is that? V'karkarya rachmana sachacha. And here clearly, according to the Torah, the text tells us that it's a kind of covering. Okay? Alma, therefore, mechitza kischach ba'inan. Therefore, we should say that the partition is like a covering, and that's what we have here. That's what it's necessary. So the question then is, the Rabbanan, what about the rabbis? How do they hold that? How do they use that phrase, that pasuk? Ahu de nichof be purta de mechaze kischach. There he says that where it's bent over a little bit, that can be as if it's seen as if it's like schach. Okay, it's basically what we've called before dofin akuma, the air bent over. Okay, going on now. Amar Abai says Abai the following: Rebbe, the Rebbe Yoshia, the Rebbe Yehuda. Okay, we've got the Rebbe Shimon, the Rabban Gamliel, Ubeit Shammai, the Rebbe Eliezer, the Achirim. All of them. Okay, what are they saying? Right? Kulhu Savira Laho, Sukkah Dirat Keva Ba'in. All of them are of the opinion that a sukkah must be of the same, I'm going to say, strength, okay, as a more permanent building. Okay? Rebbe Detanya, Rebbe as, and they're going to try to prove that statement now. Rebbe, as was taught in the Braita, Rebbe Omer, he says, Kol sukkah she'ein ba arba amot, any sukkah that does, it's not at least height, width and length of 4 by 4, sula, that is invalid. And we said that a 4 by 4 is a basis for a more permanent structure. Okay, all right. Rebbe Yoshia, Hada Amran. Rebbe Yoshia, as we said. Rebbe Yehuda Ditznan, Rebbe Yehuda as taught in another Mishnah. Sukkah shehi gvoa lamala me'esrim amah. Psula, that a sukkah that's higher than 20 amma is invalid. Why? Because a 20 amma facility is, I'm going to in a second, okay?
Give him a chance.
right? It's a good 20 amma facility. He said earlier was valid, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda machshir. Therefore, that's why Rabbi Yehuda says that that kind of sukkah is valid because it's like a more permanent facility, being 20 amma. Third, another case, all right, Rabbi Shimon. What about him, the Tanya? He says, Shtayim kihil chatan, v'shlosha afilu tefach. That again, two walls are like standard, and the third is at least a tefach. That's valid. Okay? Rabbi Shimon Omer, Shlosha kihil chatan, v'rivi'i afilu tefach. And he says the fourth that's his view. Namely, clearly, that's a more permanent facility. Rabban Gamliel, the Tanya, who teaches as follows: Ha'oseh sukato berosh agala, one who builds his sukkah on a wagon, okay, on top of a wagon, o berosh hasfina, or on a ship, right? Rabban Gamliel posel. Rabban Gamliel says it's invalid. The Rabbi Akiva machshir. Rabbi Akiva says it's acceptable. Why? Because Rabbi Gamliel is going to say, if it's on a wagon, if it's on a ship, it's right, rocky, okay, and therefore it's not a solid facility.
They didn't have mobile homes.
Okay, right? Okay, what happens? Beit Shammai, that's not. What did they say? Mi shaya rosho v'rubo b'sukkah v'shulchano b'toch habayit. Okay, that if his head and the majority of his body was in the sukkah, but the table was outside and was in the house, Beit Shammai postlin. Beit Shammai says it's not valid. Beit Hillel machshirin. Beit Hillel says it's acceptable. Therefore, it implies that all of that has to be a fairly solid facility to include, okay, all of that items, his body, his head, his table, etc. Next, Rabbi Eliezer Ditznan, who taught in a Mishnah, Hoseh sukato kamin srif, one who makes his sukkah like a round circular hut, okay? O shesamcha lekotel, or he just leans it up against the wall, almost like a lean-to, okay? That Rabbi Eliezer posel, he says that's invalid. Why? Lafisha ein lagag, because it doesn't have a roof. Again, it's got to be roofed and therefore like a real facility. Rabbi, right? Okay, going on. The
Does the roof
Chachamim
have to be-
machshir. What?
Does the roof have to be parallel to the ground? Can't the roof be at an angle?
According to him, no.
He would say that a lean-to,
Right.
okay, which would you think might be the roof, is not valid. Okay, right? The Chachamim would say, okay, now, Achirim, others, what do they say? The Tanya Achirim Omrim, as we say, others say, Sukkah ha'aseh ha'asuya kishovach, okay, psula, if it's done like a dove or a chicken coop, all right, it is invalid. Lafisha aim la zaviot, because it doesn't have any corners. Again, it's got to be more like a real facility, okay? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, okay? And now we're going to get to a brand new issue, since we're talking about the shape and the size of the sukkah. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, sukkah ha'asuya kekivshan, a sukkah that is made like a oven. Now, what are we talking about? Okay, Karen actually has a picture of ovens that were made round, brick ovens that were built in a round shape. Could be that was what they were talking about in their day, okay? But if you look in the Gemara, you see a picture, exactly a circular kind of oven. right? Im yesh ba hekefa kadei le'shev ba kaf daled b'nei adam. If in the circumference of this round oven, you could sit 24 people, okay? Kshera, that would be valid. Okay, that would be valid as a circle, right? Now, that's got to be quite a large oven, right? Okay,
We're not talking about sitting in the oven.
okay. In other words, that's the circumference.
Big
Right.
igloo.
What?
I said a big igloo.
Yeah, okay. Im lav psula. And if not, it is invalid. Kiman, according to who? Karebi, like Rebbe the Amar, who says, Kol sukkah she'en ba arba amot al arba amot psula, who says that if it doesn't have length and width, right, of 4 by 4 amos, it's invalid. How many tfachim? Usually there's 6. Usually. Okay? There is another kind of amma that has 5.
18
Okay.
to 26.
All right?
Another that's 6 in this.
Right. Anyway, but the point we're going to get to now is a little geometry. Okay? We have a circle. All right? And if we were to put a square, excuse me, inside the circle, okay? Everybody with me? We've got a square now that we're going to put inside the circle. Can we say that the length and width of the size of that square satisfy Rebbe's requirement of 4 tfachim by 4? I mean, 4 amos by 4 amos. Okay? That's the point. So the Gemara now tells us, right? Right? Okay. Right. So I'm like, if we could, right? Right. Okay. Yeah. So what happens? Michte. So we're going to say, considering the following. Okay. Gavra ba'amta yativ. If we say normally that a sitting person has the, let's call it the width of an amma, okay? Kol sheyesh behekefo shloshat tfachim. That would then tell us that then you need to have, okay, a area of about 3 tfachim across, all right? Yesh bo rochav tefach. Okay, that it has to have the diameter of a tefach. And that would seem to tell us, if that's the case, but Tresar Sagi, that it would be enough to have 12 people. Why? Because we have 12 people, each one of them is an amma. Okay, so that's 12 amma. And then you have the area, all right, that's going to be further, right? So that's the point. Okay, so now going over to the next amud a bit. Okay, Hani mili beigula, says the Gemara. That's talking about a circle, because we said the oven was in a circle. Aval beribua, when we're talking about the square. Okay, if we put a square inside the circle, okay, it's one thing. But what about if we set a square outside the circle? Okay, what about that situation? Bait fei, then we would need more. So the Gemara now says, Michdi. Okay, let's see. Kama meruba yoter al ha'igul. As I said, we're getting into geometry. How much larger is a square with a circle inside it? Okay, because you've now got to consider the points of the square.
The remaining arcs.
Okay, so what happens? Ravia, it's 1/4 larger. So therefore, B'shitsar sagi. That then would tell us that instead of saying we needed 24 people, we only would need 16 people in there. Hani mili be'igul denafik migol ribua. Okay, so here we're talking about a circle that comes from being inside, okay, the square. That's that first drawing in Rashi right next to it. Aval ribua denafik migo agula bait fe. But in the second example, where the circle is out, where the square is inside the circle, okay, we would need more. Mishum morsha the karnata, because of the extension of the corners, right? Michde. Therefore, now let's see. Kol amata beribua. If each amah, then we're going to say is the side of a square, right? Amta utre chumsha ba'al kasona is an amah and 2/5 towards and on a diagonal. B'shivsar nachi chumsha sagya. Then we would say we would have 17 less a fifth would be enough. Okay? Lo dak. But wait a second, says the Gemara. That implies that the rabbis, that Rabbi Yochanan, who was making this calculation, he was not precise in his measurements. Emor, I might say damrinam, lo dak purta. He was only imprecise a little bit. Okay? Tuba, nami amrinam lo dak. More than that, would we say that he was also, okay? Would we say then that a situation, if he was, so he was a little bit short, but if he was too much more, would we say also that it was only slightly imprecise? Amarle Mark Shisha, Berei de Rav Chista, the Rav Ashi. So we've got to have, of course, at least one of the sages who's certainly better than I am in mathematics. Okay, he's going to say, Mi svarat gavra ba'amta yati. Do we really say that the width of a person when they're seated is an amah? Is that really viable? Tzlate gavre, batarte ama yatfe. But we say 3 people. Excuse me. But what he's saying is that, okay, that 3 people occupy the space for tarte ama of 2 ama when they're seated. Okay, so what happens? So kama havu laho shitza. Okay, so we had, how much did we have when we said that there were 16? Anan shivsar nachi chumsha ba'ini. But we need the amount of space to cover 17 1/5. That's what we need. What?
17 minus.
17 minus 1/5, right? Lo dak. And that's where he said he was not precise. So to finish up now, Amor da Amrina, shall we say then, lo dak l'chumra, that he wasn't precise in regarding being stringent on this? L'kula mi amrinam lo dak. Do we say then when he's lenient that he's not going to be precise? Amar le Rav Asi le Rav Ashi. What did he tell him? Le'olam gavra ba'amta yati. No, we generally hold that a person, when they're seated, their width is that equivalent to an amah. The Rabbi Yochanan, makom gavre lo kashi. And that Rabbi Yochanan did not keep in mind, okay, the status, the situation, okay, of how much space a person sort of totally took up. And that's where we're going to stop right there for today. Okay, and we'll pick up there tomorrow. Okay.
So Amma has 6.
And Amma, okay, coming back then. Okay, we have the following. We're told that in building the Beis Hamikdash, there were two kinds of Amma. Generally, there was an Amma of 6 tfachim. For certain utensils, they used a smaller Amma of 5 tfachim. But we're also told elsewhere in the Gemara that there was an Amma that was sort of 6 plus. Okay? So that's why the Gemara has sometimes. So why is that the case? Because an Amma was considered basically from the tip of one's middle finger to one's elbow, approximately 18 inches. Okay. So different sources are going to give you a different.
Difficulty building. If it's changes, I told you what official chapter said on the tape. So they're saying